Welcome to the Washington Watch News Desk. I'm Sarah Holliday, and here is the latest news. More people are waking up to the international movement to keep women's spaces in sports exclusive to actual women. The Ladies Professional Golfing Association, or LPGA, is the latest to come around. Just earlier this week, LPGA policy allowed biological men to compete against women. But over the past several months, experts in medicine, science, sports physiology, golf performance, and gender policy law all weighed in on the controversy of a biological male playing on the ladies' tour. In the end, they confirmed something most people already know. There's a major biological difference between men and women. The LPGA finally acknowledged those facts and made a slight policy change that will go into effect next year. It used to be that any trans-identifying man could compete. Now, the LPGA has limited eligibility to males who haven't gone through puberty. Women's rights activists say it's a start, at least. That same movement scored another victory in Ohio last week when Republican Governor Mike DeWine signed the Protect All Students Act. And while it does protect all students, the law will especially protect the state's girls. Under this bill, private spaces in schools like bathrooms, locker rooms, showers, and changing rooms will be limited to one sex. In effect, DeWine said there will be no more mixing of boys and girls in the name of radical gender ideology. Most agree these are major steps in the right direction. Now, let's turn to the Middle East, where tensions between Israel and Hamas seem to grow by the day. And Amnesty International is only adding fuel to the fire. This global organization just released a nearly 300-page report, and it came with strong accusations against Israel. Watch.
We looked at everything that needed to be considered, and at the end, the only reasonable conclusion that could be drawn is that Israel intended and intend to commit genocide.
The Israeli Foreign Ministry immediately responded to this claim that in the fight for its survival, Israel has committed genocide. They insisted that the report was based on lies and entirely false. Ministry spokesman Oren Marmorstein set the record straight. He declared that Israeli citizens had been subjected to daily attacks. Israel is defending itself against these attacks, acting fully in accordance with international law. While this report has been months in the making, it's also not the first of its kind from Amnesty International. One noteworthy aspect of the document is its claim that Israel is guilty of, quote, repeated direct attacks on civilians. Yet, some have wondered, what about Hamas? After all, the terrorist organization has repeatedly used their own civilians as human shields. Amnesty International clearly didn't take that into consideration. Back to the U.S. There's another interesting conversation taking place at the Department of Education. U.S. officials are scratching their heads. They're trying to understand why public school math scores are so remarkably low. In fact, data released Wednesday by the National Center for Education Statistics shows the scores plummeted between 2019 and 2023. NCES Commissioner Peggy Carr had this to say.
The results are sobering. This decline that we're seeing was there in 2015. So all of this cannot be blamed on COVID. We have been struggling with this declining scores, particularly in math, for a while.
But if COVID didn't cause it, what did? At least some experts have noted that within this time frame, there was a significant rise in LGBT activism in schools. Many have even argued that ideology has become a priority in a number of districts, one that has taken the place of important learning time in subjects like math. Regardless, there have yet to be any definitive answers to these lingering questions. And those are today's headlines. I'm Sarah Holliday. For more news and commentary, be sure to check out the Washington Stand at washingtonstand.com and follow us on social media for updates at FRC DC. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll see you tomorrow with more news.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
We need a military that is 100% focused on protecting our country and enhancing our national security, not implementing a woke agenda. Our military is not a social experiment. It should be a lethal fighting force feared by our enemies and made up of our best and brightest in this country.
That was Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville on the Senate floor raising concerns about the National Defense Authorization Act, which is currently making its way through Congress. Thank you for joining me for this Thursday edition of Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins. Well, here's what we have lined up for you today. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley is leading the charge against a provision in that defense bill that would require women 18 and older to register for selective service. That's a precursor to being drafted. Senator Hawley joins me later to discuss his efforts to stop this controversial move by the left. And over in the House, Speaker Mike Johnson and leading Republicans met today with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to kick off the new Department of Government Efficiency.
There is an enormous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, and I think everyone knows that intuitively. And so the efforts here, both with our subcommittees that are being created here and with the DOGE effort itself, will be to explore that, to investigate it, and lay it bare for the American people to see. I think that's how we'll begin to bring about the change that we all need.
We'll hear from Texas Congressman Pete Sessions, co-chair of the new DOGE caucus, on how this initiative aims to cut government waste. Well, U.S. education continues to struggle as newly released test scores for 4th and 8th graders show a sharp decline in math proficiency.
And when compared to other highly developed countries, the U.S. ranks 26th in math. The pandemic highlighted these deficiencies even further. Parents finally had a window into the indoctrination that was taking place. School staff were more concerned about their own pronouns rather than students understanding how to use a pronoun in a sentence.
That was Michigan Congressman Tim Walberg, a member of the House Education Committee. Now, public school advocates are blaming COVID, but is there a deeper issue? We'll talk with FRC's Meg Kilgannon, a former Department of Education official, about what's really going on in public education. And on the international front, chaos in South Korea continues where political unrest continues. We'll explore the spiritual condition of the nation and the role of the church in this critical moment with Dr. John Lee, lead pastor of the Rock Presbyterian Church in Maryland. Finally, as we witness the spiritual battles that are shaping events worldwide, I want to invite you to join Operation Prayer Shield if you've not already done so. Now, this prayer initiative invites believers to seek God's divine protection and guidance, not only upon our nation, but our allies in these very, very volatile times leading up to January the 20th and beyond. If you'd like to join us in this effort, simply text SHIELD, that's SHIELD, to 67742. That's SHIELD to 67742 to participate. All right. Let's get started. Just moments ago, House and Senate Republicans wrapped up a brainstorming session with entrepreneurs Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who have been tapped to lead the incoming Trump administration's new Department on Government Efficiency. While today's meeting excluded Democrats, bipartisan discussions are planned as even some on the left, believe it or not, expressed interest in this new initiative. So what exactly was discussed today? Join me now by phone, Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas, who is co-chair of the newly formed House DOGE caucus. Congressman Sessions, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you very much. The conversation today evolved itself around two meetings with both of these young men who have associated themselves with the efficiency of government. They both come to the table very interestingly in a very similar fashion, and that is while they have been highly successful, one of them being probably the richest man in the world, they are concerned about our country. They see where the mismanagement of financial data, of the size of government, of the inefficiency is a threat, an immediate threat to the greatest nation in the world, and that they want to come and add their, not just ideas, but their hard work and their good name to this effort. And so they have set, which I did not know until today, an arbitrary figure of some 18 months from now for 4th of July 2026, that they have want to make significant progress and believe that it will be on track for them to announce success. And so that we were gathering together, House members, Senate members, Republicans, and might I add that the Doge caucus in the House now has 3 Democrats who have joined with us, who see that government efficiency must be a priority for Congress.
Well, Congressman Sessions, the Congress clearly plays a role in this, because in the previous Trump administration, a budget was actually introduced by the president that called for cuts, but Congress dismissed that because Congress is the one that controls the purse string. So while this agency can look at areas to cut, it's ultimately the Congress that funds government.
Well, that's true, but we're talking about efficiencies here. We're talking about we may come to an agreement to appropriate billions or trillions of dollars, but it goes into a bureaucracy that is wholly incapable of effective delivery to the United States, to the American people. An example of that is, and it's not even disputed, we just don't know the actual figures. The largest government building in Washington, D.C. is the Ronald Reagan building. And yet, in testimony before the subcommittee, of which I'm the chairman of, the discussions were up to 60% of the employees in that building, not military and not law enforcement, went less than 1 day a week. If you cannot come to work, if you cannot work with people who need, I mean, these government jobs are not solo practices. They are working with people, looking at databases, working at problems, working across agencies, and that's an example of the need that we have to make sure that things work. In the congressional district I represent, Texas 17th District, 4 years ago, we received money from FEMA that would be about combating wildfires with a fire station, so to speak, that would be put up way out in the central Texas, that would be there to fight wherever the wildfire was in central Texas. And it was some $478,000. We have yet to even pitch an inch of dirt at this. And so it's 3 years later, nothing has happened, and prices have risen 40%. So the inefficiency of government, the rules and regulations, the way that they are placed in a way, we're going to maybe rearrange that stack. We're going to look at every single part of government and make it efficient.
This is going to prompt some soul searching, I would think, Congressman Sessions, because this goes back to what is the purpose of government. Because if you look at a lot of these programs, and I'm not going to pick on any particular party, but it's not necessarily been about delivering services, but it's about creating jobs. And that's not the role of government. But that has been the role of many of these programs.
Well, I don't think that there's any question in my mind that some of the conversation exactly that you're having could be true. But the vast number of jobs that are created or that are in the government are jobs that are supposed to be there to fulfill a need of people. And what happens is that there are those that come and tinker with that, like the President of the United States, who organized and to have a negotiated settlement of a union bargain with Social Security that their 45,000 employees could stay at home under those programs rather than going to work.
Right.
And I will tell you that if they are light years behind, which I believe they are, and inefficient, the American people are going to see this solely for what it is. We've had problems. You'll recall just a few years ago, the passport office.
Right.
We have problems with the IRS. So we'll get in under this. But if the American people think that what we're doing is worthy, then it will succeed. If they think what we're doing is anything other than that, we'll be in trouble.
So, Congressman Sessions, let's talk about how the Doge caucus will operate. What are the first steps you're going to take to get this ball rolling?
Well, the first steps that we were going to take, we already have. We have put an invitation out. The three leaders of the caucus are going to make sure that Aaron Bean and I began this, and then we've now added in Congressman from Utah, Blake Moore. And Blake is going to be in with us because we felt like he would add a particular voice as a new young member. But we believe that what's happened is we have made it available to members. 60-some members of Republicans. 3 Democrats have agreed to join us. This is now a, quote, bipartisan effort. 4 now, as of today. Somebody else stepped up. We want to begin talking about all the ideas, not just 1 or 2 or 5. And we all have ideas about the government efficiency. As the chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, Government Operations and Federal Workforce, I've been doing many of these hearings, and this government's wholly inefficient, which is what left it ripe for exactly what we're doing. We will then move to next, and remember, we've only got 2 weeks left before we reorganize. But what we will do is begin formulating things where people can come and provide feedback. We have we have an email address, doge@mail.house.gov. We want people to send us their information, their ideas. We want industry involved. We want commerce involved. And we're going to take these, what will be thousands of ideas, work through them with our members that will be busy, and then present plans every few weeks to where we keep up with people who are regular Americans who want to see us succeed.
Congressman, we just have about a minute left, and I know you've got to get on the floor to vote, but Vivek Ramaswamy mentioned low-hanging fruit for reducing government waste. How much are we talking about there?
Well, the low-hanging fruit is where he believes, and I do too, that there are functions that the government performs that it should not be the sole provider or should not be doing it. Obviously, there are conversation about a lot of things. We have 158 different jobs programs that are duplicative efforts. So we're going to look at the duplicative effort. We're going to look at things that are not following the mandate of what their department was about, and that is an easy pickings. So we will quickly float these up. We will decide how we're going to do it. If I'm going to suggest to you what we ought to do with somebody, I better have an answer about how I'm going to do it, and if it's a necessary part that needs to be covered, where would it move? It's easy for us to say, oh, well, we'll move it back to states. But that then requires we go through the appropriations process and get that done.
Well, it's much needed, and we look forward to watching and reporting on the process. Congressman Sessions, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Stick with us, folks. We're back after this.
The throne of Jesus Christ is unchallenged. His name was never on the ballot to begin with, and it's never going to be on the ballot. He's the King of Kings, and he's the Lord of Lords, and nothing's going to change that. And so our mission stays the same. Preach the gospel, make disciples, get ready for heaven. In the meantime, that we're to advance the concerns of the kingdom of God here on earth.
America has entered a critical and vulnerable period from now until January the 20th. Join Family Research Council for Operation Prayer Shield, a 10-week prayer initiative for our nation. From now until January 20th, our country faces global challenges, a transition of leadership, and a lame duck session of Congress. This season calls for heightened spiritual vigilance, discernment, and prayer. Text the word SHIELD to 67742 to join us. You'll have access to prayer points, scripture, prayer calls. Text SHIELD to 67742. Unite with us and pray for our nation.
not be discouraged. Don't lose heart. Don't lose the faith. Stand now strong, because the Lord has given us the great privilege of living in a time when our choices matter, when our lives matter, when our courage matters. So let's stand together and save this great country. God bless the United States of America.
The American Republic has a freedom like no other. It has roots in the scriptures, far more than any other heritage. And if we as followers of Jesus and conservatives don't defend it, who will?
Neutrality is not an option. There are many Christians who believe that if we just keep our heads down, if we just don't say the wrong thing, that somehow we will come out of this unscathed. You're naive if you think that. Because what they want from us is not our silence. What they want from us is our submission.
Part of the dilemma of Christianity in our generation is that we've relied a little too much on human wisdom and human reasoning, human strength, human resource, and we've relied too little on the power of God and God's ability to open doors that we can't open and do things that we couldn't even hope to begin to do.
This may not be an easy task, but we are living in a moment of challenge, but also of great opportunity. And we know always that we are not alone, that His Spirit empowers us and protects us, and that He can do the unimaginable. Dobbs, after all, was never supposed to happen.
Father, we thank you. You have entrusted us with this moment in history, and I pray that we would be found faithful, and that as a result of our faithfulness to you, that thousands, millions would come into the kingdom as they would experience the forgiveness of sin and the new life that is found only in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Thursday. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Better yet, download the Stand Firm app so that you can have Washington Watch with you wherever you go. Not only Washington Watch, but the Washington Stand and Stand on the Word, our daily devotional. You can find it in the App Store, Stand Firm. For the third time in 4 years, Democrats are trying to mandate that women register for selective service through the annual National Defense Authorization Act. Now, we currently do not have a draft, have not had a draft since the Vietnam War. However, the selective service is in place to get young men, 18 and older, they have to register. In the event that we have a draft, and given the fact that the military continues to miss its recruiting numbers because of all of the woke agenda that's been injected into our nation's military, they're now wanting to force women to register for the selective service so that they could be drafted. Well, there's a group of Republican senators pushing back, and leading the charge is Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. He joins me now by phone to discuss the status of this battle. Senator Hawley, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, so give us the status. The National Defense Authorization Act making its way through Congress. This is an annual must-pass bill, funds the military, also gives direction and policy. What's going on?
Well, we're awaiting the text of it, Tony, the final text, but I can tell you that as it came out of the Senate, it once again contained the draft our daughters language, as I think of it, which is totally unacceptable, and I have voted against this legislation in years past because this language was included in it, and today a group of my colleagues and I have sent a letter to our leadership making clear that we will oppose this legislation on the floor, if necessary, as I have done in the past, until this language is removed. It is an absolute travesty to try and force women to register. And just let's be clear about this. This is compulsory now. Compulsory. Right. It's not as if, well, you can volunteer. It's compulsory service for women in the military. It's totally wrong.
I see this two motivating factors behind this, and I want to get your thoughts on this. So part of it is the left continuing to want to erase the difference between genders. We see that on so many fronts. But also, I think from a very practical standpoint, as they have foisted upon our nation's military this woke agenda, they're not meeting their recruiting numbers because young people are not wanting to join the military.
That's right. They're not meeting their recruiting numbers. They're not meeting their retention numbers. Tony, they're losing more folks than they should. And you're right, it's because the left has turned the military, or tried to, into a giant social experiment. And I know this because I talk to folks, particularly enlisted men and women, all the time. In fact, I've got them in my own family, proud to say that. And what I hear from them all up and down the chain of command, and again, especially the enlisted folks, is that they have this woke agenda shoved down their throats, and what they want to do is defend the United States of America. That's why they enlisted. It's why they want to be in the service. But the Democrats are trying to turn the military into a giant experiment in trans rights. I mean, right now we are paying for transgender surgeries in the military, our tax dollars. They're trying to use our tax dollars to pay for abortions in the military. They want to have compulsory draft of women in the military. My view is stop all of this social experimentation and get back to defending America. That's what we should be focused on.
Absolutely. But I see that they want to rely upon the women to fill the void created by the decline in those that are voluntarily joining the military. So many will say, well, it's not going to happen. We haven't had a draft in 50 years. That's not true. Where the military is headed, we may have to see a draft.
Well, and particularly given the pace of our foreign conflicts and the proliferating foreign conflicts, Tony, especially under this administration, which is thankfully on its way out the door. But you think about, we are just inches away from having boots on the ground in Ukraine, perhaps in significant numbers. I mean, if this president's policy, if Joe Biden's policies are going to continue, which they're not, thank the Lord, but I'm just saying, you think about our military commitments, they're not getting smaller overseas, they're getting bigger, which is its own problem. Right. But to your point, as they proliferate and as our real numbers of both recruitment and retention decline, the idea that, we'll never go to a draft, we may well have to go to a draft. And the idea that we would compulsory draft women, I think is wrong.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I'm happy if my daughters would want to serve in the military. I've got one that's in law enforcement, one that's a nurse. But to be a nation that would force women to defend and fight for us, something about that, quite frankly, Senator, is wrong.
It is. It's wrong, and I think it sends the wrong message in all kinds of ways. In many ways, it sends a message that we don't respect the personal choice of women, that we don't respect their choices for their lives, because what we're telling them, I just can't emphasize this enough, is that you don't have a choice. You must register, and then if drafted, you must serve no matter what. And listen, a draft for anybody is an infringement on people's rights. I mean, the Supreme Court has had to litigate this, been clear about it, but we've said in cases of great national need that it can be done, in great national need. But let's be clear that this would be a massive infringement on the rights of women without them having any say in it whatsoever. It's 100 miles away from a woman saying, yes, I want to serve voluntarily. That's awesome. That's wonderful. That's not what this is.
Right, and infringement upon the family as well. And again, trying to erase the distinction between men and women. This is what the left has been about. But it appears that voters are waking up to this. So is this the time to put this issue to rest?
It really is, and you're right about voters. I mean, we have had the chance now, just in this last election, both at the national level and in many states, looking at what the left is doing by trying to erase men and women as biological realities altogether with their radical trans agenda. And in state after state, including so-called blue states, you see voters decisively rejecting this. And I think this is the time to draw the line and say we've got to get this woke garbage out of our national government and out of the military. We should begin with the military and say no more spending on trans surgeries and trans care, no more spending on abortions, no more trying to force women into the draft. We need to stop all of this and recalibrate, get back to the basics, get back to defending this country.
So, Senator Hawley, how can our listeners and our viewers help?
Contact your members of Congress, your senators, and members of the House of Representatives, and tell them don't vote for the defense bill if it includes the draft our daughters provision. We need every conservative member of Congress to stand up and say, we will not support drafting our daughters. We want it out of the defense bill, and we will stop the defense bill unless it comes out. This is the critical time, Tony. We're going to vote on this likely next week. So this is the time. We'll see text as early as tomorrow or the weekend. This is the time to act right now.
All right, we'll give out the Capitol switchboard number and encourage people to make those calls to back you up. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. The Capitol switchboard number 202-224-3121. Don't go away. We're back with more after this. It begins here, and here, and here. Every day. Before you stand, you need solid ground. Standing in a culture that wants you to surrender the truth won't work unless you have a firm foundation. At Family Research Council, we have that firm foundation, and you can find us standing. We stand for the value of all human life. We stand for the right of families to flourish. And every day we stand for your freedom to believe and to live out those beliefs both at home and abroad. We work with government officials, educating them on the issues from a biblical worldview. And when necessary, we hold them accountable. We equip Christians across America to be informed and to take action in their communities. With our daily radio program, television appearances, and vast online presence, we reach people where they are. We envision an America where all human life is valued, families flourish, and religious liberty thrives. And that won't be realized if we're not standing. Stand for faith. Stand for family. Stand for freedom. Stand with us at FRC.
Did you know there are many faithful Christians on Capitol Hill fighting alongside Family Research Council for faith, family, and freedom? Download the Stand Firm app today to view the latest video series from FRC, Defending the Faith, Profiles in Leadership. The series features exclusive sit-down interviews with our nation's leaders that go beyond the policies and politics to the events that brought them to Washington, D.C. Download the Stand Firm app today.
All right, welcome back to Washington Watch. Let me give you that switchboard number again so you can call into you can call both your member of the House and your two senators. Same number, 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. Give them your zip code. If you don't know who your congressman is, they'll connect you with his office. This is the National Defense Authorization Act. Vote against drafting your daughter's provision if it is in the bill. Again, 202-224-3121. All right, street protests continued for a second day in South Korea's capital city of Seoul as the country's president, Yoon Suk-yeol, faces mounting pressure to resign over his shocking martial law declaration. Amid the chaos, religious leaders have reportedly emerged as some of the most vocal defenders of the nation's democratic values. Now, in a strongly worded statement yesterday, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea emphasized the importance of safeguarding the country's hard-earned democracy and warned against actions that could undermine it. The bishops also called for accountability and dialogue. Now, considering the critical role that faith communities have had in shaping public discourse in Korea and really advancing Korea to becoming a very strong economy and a very prosperous country, what role might they be playing in this? Joining me now to discuss this, Dr. John Lee, senior pastor of the Rock Presbyterian Church in Bethesda, Maryland. Pastor John was born in Seoul and immigrated to the D.C. area in 1972. Pastor John, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Tony.
Now, I know you have friends who are pastors and missionaries in South Korea as well as North. What have you been hearing from your contacts there on the ground?
Well, just yesterday I got a letter from a dear friend who is a pastor there, and he sent some update, but mainly prayer concerns, prayer points. As people have been watching the news, there's a sense of turmoil, chaos, confusion, and so my friend asked that we as a church pray for safety, but also for a movement of repentance, especially for the churches and its leaders to come before the Lord and humble themselves and repent and not get caught up in the accusation, not get caught up in sort of the back and forth attacks of one another.
So, Pastor John, we here on Washington Watch, I mean, we're a Christian organization, Family Research Council, and we see what happens in our country, see what's happening in our country. And there's a side that we see in the natural that plays itself out in the political arena, but we know that there's a spiritual side of things. And I would have to say that what is happening in South Korea from a spiritual standpoint that is behind what we see in the headlines?
I think that's the key issue, actually. I mean, it's in the what we would call the invisible realm, but it's not totally invisible. It's embodied. And so Korea has a unique history. One can argue that the existence of present-day Korea is in large part due to the gospel and due to its courageous Christian leaders. And I could spend a whole lot of time reviewing the history. Korea itself is dependent upon the prayers of God's people in Korea. Soon after the Korean War ended in '53, Koreans were desperate, and many of the Christians started to pray, devoting their lives to prayer. Korea became famous for early morning prayer and for establishing prayer mountains. And so in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe even the early 2000s, there was a vital movement of prayer. But in the last 15, 20 years, there's been a steep decline, not just in numbers, but spiritual vitality. And so I would say part of what's been happening, part of the negative things we see and hear is due to the church losing its identity, losing its mooring and anchorage in Jesus Christ, losing its first love, and losing the desperation in prayer. So I am actually praying that during this crisis, that there will be an opportunity for people to turn to Jesus and see the dead-endedness of what they've been doing, trying to find hope in political solutions. And so I'm praying that in this desperate hour, people will once again turn to God in prayer. They've done it before.
Right.
They've gone through crises before. So I'm praying that they would turn to the Lord and go back to the basics of discipleship, praying for revival, and making sure that the churches are grounded in biblical discipleship.
Let me ask you if this assessment is accurate from a distance, clearly not connected as you are, but as you described the acceleration of the church in South Korea, we saw an increase in the nation's prosperity. The nation was blessed. The nation has sent missionaries even to the United States as a result of God's blessing of South Korea. But could it be that the prosperity and the blessing of God has led to complacency in terms of the spiritual disciplines that made the nation so strong?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate diagnosis. The prosperity turned the church in a worldly way. And so the gods of the world, wealth, and the hopes and the fears of the world got into the church. And so I think that is, I would say, an accurate description of what's happening spiritually speaking.
Pastor John, we're up against a break. I'm going to ask you if you can just hold on and join me in the first part of the next segment so we can talk about how we can be praying for South Korea. Our listeners and our viewers, I put out a social media post this morning encouraging people to pray, and I want to know how we can pray specifically for the church in South Korea. So if you'll stick around with us, folks, we're going to continue our conversation with Pastor John Lee, and then we're going to be joined a little bit later by Meg Kilgannon to talk about some new results of test scores. Very alarming. Don't go away. Hello, I'm Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council here in Washington, D.C. Behind me is one of the most recognizable buildings in all the world, the U.S. Capitol. What does it stand for? Well, most people say government. But you know the Bible talks about 4 institutions of government? You know what they are? And do we have a republic or a democracy? Well, what do you say? Also, what about this thing, separation of church and state? Does that mean Christians shouldn't be involved in government? Guess what? We address those issues and more in our new God and Government course. I invite you to join us to see what the historical record and the Bible has to say about government. Join us for God and Government.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
All right, welcome back to Washington Watch. Continuing my conversation with Dr. John Lee, Senior Pastor of Rock Presbyterian Church in Bethesda, Maryland, regarding what is happening in South Korea. Pastor John was born in Seoul and immigrated to the United States in 1972. So Pastor John, before I get to the prayer points of how we can be praying for our brothers and sisters there in South Korea, is there a parallel? Are there lessons for the United States to learn from this?
I think obviously so. Just like the U.S., there's been a decline of church attendance, church involvement, especially among the young. And so I've been looking at Korea as a harbinger, potential harbinger. I pray that America won't follow the footsteps of Korea, but so far many of the signs are similar. Disinterest among the young people, affiliating with no religion at all, sense of despair, a sense of loneliness, very similar. And so I am concerned about the U.S. Even as I think about Korea, I can't help but think about our situation here in our country.
I would tell you that's what grabbed my attention when I saw that in reading the political landscape. And I have to say it was 25, 30 years ago I met Dr. Cho here in the United States, who was just talking about the vibrancy of prayer and really drew me into a much deeper prayer life with the Lord as a result of seeing what was happening in South Korea through prayer, through a focus on prayer. And that really has spread around the world. And so when I see the complacent, what I perceive to be complacency in the church that came about as a result of prosperity that came through the prayers. And this is not new. I mean, we read this in the Old Testament. The Israelites have the same issue, and I believe America has the same issue. It's sometimes easier to deal with difficulty than it is the prosperity that comes from walking with the Lord.
Absolutely. You know, the Korean revival, modern Korea dates back to 1907. And the revival grew during the Japanese occupation from 1910 to 1945. And so if you see the context of actual growth of the church and revival, it was during times of hardship and persecution. And so if it requires some suffering and for the church to come awake and be in need and be prayerful, I hate to say this, but I would rather have Jesus and persecution and not have Jesus and comfort. And I pray that the church in Korea will be of the same mind.
And I hope that the takeaway, as you said, I agree. I think it could be a harbinger. And I think if we can be intentional about our discipleship, even as we enjoy the prosperity that has come because of those who have come before us in laying out a nation that followed biblical principles, we just have to be intentional. We've not been. We've not been intentional in teaching the next generations. We've not been intentional in our Bible, our prayer, and I just hope we can learn those lessons. So how can we be praying? You said you got a letter, you got a note from South Korea.
Yeah.
How can we be praying?
From dear friend. Yes. And so 4 prayer points. First, pray that God will have his way in Korea, whether it be his judgment or grace. We ask that God's hand will deal with us and none other. Pretty strong prayer point. Number 2, pray that Koreans, beginning with Christians and the churches, will humble themselves, repent and pray, and not point fingers at one another. We have all sinned. We've all gone astray. There's no love. There's no justice. And so we become proud and self-righteous. Number 3, pray for safety. Safety from civil violence and safety from North Korea. And lastly, pray for God's reversal. He quotes, my friend does, Genesis 50, verse 20. Joseph tells his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And so this is an evil, this is a bad, but perhaps God could reverse this terrible situation, short-term terrible situation, and turn it for the good. I took a little note before we met, and I thought, here we are in crisis. Lord, I pray that people will not give themselves over to chaos, but they will give themselves over to Christ. And so I do see this as an opportunity for people to turn to God. And that's the greatest gift a crisis can bring, people turning to the living God.
Amen. Well, we will encourage our listeners and our viewers to be praying along with those prayer points, and we'll put those out with our Operation Prayer Shield. And folks, if you'd like to join the Prayer Shield, text SHIELD to 67742. Dr. John Lee, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And folks, I do want to encourage you to be praying. As I've said, this is a very volatile time. Very volatile time. We cannot just write these things off, it just happens. No, there's something behind this, okay? We need to be vigilant. We need to be praying. So text the word SHIELD to 67742 and join thousands of others praying with focus, all right? SHIELD to 67742. All right, today's word comes from Isaiah 23, where God foretells the destruction and eventual restoration of Tyre, which was a major hub of commerce in that day. And it shall be at the end of 70 years that the Lord will deal with Tyre. She will return to her hire and commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Now, this passage likens Tyre's commerce to immorality, implying its pursuit of profit involved compromising values. God not only disapproved, but brought judgment. In today's world, economics often takes center stage. What's the first indicator highlighted after major events? It's the stock market. And while I support a strong economy and believe capitalism offers the best framework for societal benefit, it must rest on a moral foundation. Profit cannot be the highest good. If it were, unethical practices like drug dealing, human trafficking, or fraud would seem justifiable, and clearly they are not. As followers of Christ, we must ensure that economic activity aligns with God's principles, prioritizing righteousness over profit. Tyre's example illustrates what Jesus said. We can't serve God and money. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, text Bible to 67742. Recently published data from the National Center for Education Statistics further corroborates what many parents have witnessed over the past few years. COVID and remote learning inflicted a huge blow on the academic performance of students in America. But there's more than just COVID. Now, according to the latest trends in international mathematics and science study, TIMSS, math scores have dropped dramatically going into the pandemic and post-pandemic. So how bad is this? And what is the real culprit? Joining me now to talk about this, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies at Family Research Council. Meg served as the U.S. Department of Education Director of the Office of Faith and Opportunity Initiatives during the first Trump administration. Meg, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here, Tony.
So were you surprised by the study's results?
I wish I were surprised, but this is yet another study of student performance that in the history of the Department of Education has showed a fairly steady decline, a marked decline here in these years, these most recent years. We've had some blips of recovery over the history of the department, but in general, student performance is in decline. And, you know, parents will be blamed for this. The students themselves will be blamed for this. The administrators will say, well, you know, we need more social emotional learning money. We need more money to address this problem.
Right.
And the department's never had any more money than it's had right now.
Well,
so that's clearly not the problem.
If they need more money, give them Vivek and Elon's number to call, because I doubt they're going to get more money. In math, just in math, America's fourth graders, their scores fell by 18 points. That's by 18 points. Eighth graders' scores fell by 27 points. That's the biggest drop since the U.S. began participating in this test back in 1995. Now, again, we're hearing these excuses, well, it was COVID, and no question. I mean, if you're not in school, it's going to affect you. But when you look at what they've been focusing on the last 4 years during the Biden administration in our public schools, they've been focusing on the bathrooms, they've been focusing on transgendering our children, and so this all adds up. You fail on the basics when you focus on this nonsense.
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. And the horror of it is that if we had another 4 years under the Biden administration, they would just double and triple down on that messaging, right? So it's really wonderful that we will have an opportunity to have a reset with the Trump administration. But in the end, this is a problem of education that is controlled at the state and local level in the United States. And it is more important than ever for Christians to be involved in the public school system and for us as citizens to want excellent schools. We certainly pay for them. We certainly spend enough money to have the best school system in the world. Right. And our children deserve that. And they are being robbed of it right now.
Yeah, and I want to clarify that. For those who have their children in private school or their homeschool, which I highly recommend, homeschooling our children, but it doesn't matter. There's so many other kids who go to the public schools that our children are going to grow up with. We're going to do business with them. They may work for us as employees. We want to make sure they get the best education possible. And as you say, we're paying dearly for public education in this country. It ought to teach them the basics. Now, here's a question for you, Meg Kilgannon. Based on these numbers, will there be any introspection in public education to say, what are we doing wrong?
Well, I think that the frontline teachers get into education mostly because they want to teach children and they want to help them learn, right? So I think in the classroom level, in the 4th and the 8th grade, I think you'll see that teachers are upset about these scores, and of course they want their students to learn, right? But the problem is the educational industrial complex, the blob. The people who are administrators, who are all about the ideological parts of the school system and not so much about the performance parts of the school system. Mm-hmm. That really is the conflict.
And so that's where Christian parents and citizens come in to run for school board. In fact, we just saw this in the last election. I mean, this was a big issue that continues to turn over school boards.
Absolutely. We see even in deep blue states like California, we see Christians running for school board, winning their elections, and demanding things like parental notification if your child goes to school and claims that they are a different gender identity. Simply notifying parents about that is not something that I think most people find controversial. Obviously, a parent would need to be informed. So that is, of course, not the situation in California right now. And so the schools, the Chino Valley school system has a policy that they passed and is now in the court system. And the voters of that area have rewarded those folks with a completely conservative school board. And a gentleman who was recalled from the school board in a neighboring county, was returned to his seat after the union spent a lot of money recalling him from the school board for daring to inform parents about what's happening in the school system. And he ran again and won, and will be going back to the school board. So this shows you that even in deep blue places, parents are fed up and they are starting to engage, and children have to benefit from that.
So one of the first steps would be, as we see the policies change in these school boards, would be involve parents. Make sure they're notified when kids are, confused about their gender and their sexual identity, instead of hiding it from the parents and fueling it in the schools, that they let the parents be a part of this decision. I mean, that's one way to stop the indoctrination. And maybe that will force the schools to focus on the basics of teaching the kids to read and write and do math.
Right. I think this therapeutic attitude we have toward education is really unfortunate because, there is a level of self-esteem that comes from learning at school and performing at school, and a way to escape the problems maybe you have in your life by focusing on something else, on learning and doing well on your tests, or at least trying to do that, right? Escaping into reading books. And when you deny that to children, you really don't equip them to reach their full potential. Their whole work of childhood is to develop you as the person God has called you to be, develop yourself that way. Right. And you do that with your parents, and your teachers are supposed to be helping along in that process as partners. But when we see the school system inserting itself in ways that are just overreaching, that's when these problems happen.
Meg, we just have about 30 seconds left, but could this be a moment where the American people are focused on this issue, where fundamental change that could be generational could take place?
I think that it is, and I certainly am praying for that and hoping for that, and I'm encouraging everybody who can hear our voices to consider what they can do to impact the school system in their area, because it's your school too.
All right, Meg Kilgannon, always great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
And folks, that's another thing to add to your prayer list. Maybe you need to run for a school board seat. We need to speak up. This is a huge moment. I was talking with a state elected official in another state today about the reprieve that November the 5th gave to America and to Christians. We've got to do something with it. We've got to pray. We've got to vote. We've got to stand. So do your part. All right, out of time for today. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you could do, and you've prayed, prepared, and taken your stand, by all means.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com.